Matt Busby had called on those that remained to keep the flag flying. But who was there? The programme for the first game after Munich showed no United team.
The ground was packed when I arrived at about 5:30. It was a game like no other I've ever been to before or since.
Billy Fuchs wins the toss for Manchester United against Sheffield Wednesday. And it's the most dramatic game Busby's Babes have ever played.
It wasn't just about football, that game. It had got something to do with a giant of football brought to his knees and now trying to struggle off the floor and fight on.
Scratch team or no, this is straight out of the Busby mould. And make no mistake...
That night was unbelievable. No, I don't think anybody would have beaten us that night. I just do not think if we'd have played Real Madrid, they'd have beaten us that night.
When they scored, you know, people ran on the pitch, me too. And I was on duty, yeah.
Harry Gregg's a tower of strength to his youthful colleagues. Time and again he turns defence into another opening for attack. 17-year-old Mark Pearson has the ball. Alec Dawson's ready to receive. And there's number 3.
United went on to reach the FA Cup final. But more importantly, they were still in Europe and faced a tough semi-final against AC Milan. They would have to play without one of the youngest babes, Bobby Charlton. He had recovered quickly and was called up by England for his first cap against Scotland. His performance guaranteed his place for the next international. Unfortunately, it clashed with the Milan tie.
And Bobby Charlton runs in for a magnificent goal.
The FA refused to release him.
Terrible. Well, we needed Bobby. Of course, he was the leader. And they took him to play in I think it was a friendly game. You know, I mean, that was unbelievable. And that was typical of them, you know, of the FA. Going to punish Manchester United and Matt Busby for going against their wishes or showing who is the boss or whatever. But I thought it was just absolute stupidity on their part.
But the club was lifted by Busby's return from hospital.
In spite of his injured leg, Matt is in great spirits, as happy as a schoolboy at the prospect of seeing his beloved team again.
Actually, I was terrified to come and look at the ground, the people at that time. I remember my first reaction was never to have anything to do with football again.
The team was staying at the Norbrett, and I had to stop 2 or 3 times on the road, you know. He broke down every time he thought about the crash and the lads that had been killed, you know. And he said his life's work was over.
I'll never forget the first time we all met him again. We were all assembled in the dressing room, and he looked at us all. Tears came in his eyes, and he just walked out. We understood we knew what he was going through. He just was looking at faces that weren't there.
When he came back, he was on crutches, and we'd go and meet him at the door, and he'd go upstairs through the director's door, up the stair, and he would give you his crutches while he forced himself to walk down the passage using the wall, you know. Amazing. Really, really gutsy.
And there the cheers of the crowd as Matt Busby returns once again to Old Trafford and takes his usual seat, the manager's seat.
I think it said something in the nature we're all aware of what's happened. We have got to carry on and rebuild this club, this great club of ours.
He said he owed it to the lads who had died. He said for 10 years they would have mastered Europe and all English football, all European football. They had such talent, and they were all so young too.
Matt was too ill to travel to Milan. Fears about flying meant a long journey over land for the team.
Of course, we travelled by train to London, then ferry, then train, all the way to Milan. It took us a couple of days to do that.
It was just unbelievable. We weren't allowed in the ground till half an hour before the kick-off. Jimmy Murphy storming about the coach, saying that if we're not in the ground in the next 5 minutes, we turn the coach round and we're going home. We're not being treated like this.
This was different. This was hostile. This really was hostile, and I'd never experienced that. That was the first time in Europe I'd experienced this hostility. They were throwing things at the bus, and it was terrible.
I mean, when they played that AC Milan, we knew that there was no hope that the team that was then was going to beat them. There was no way, honestly. Although I think they won 2-1 the game at Old Trafford there that night. But we knew that once they went away, they'd get slaughtered, you know, because, all due respect to the lads that did play, they wasn't good enough.
Real Madrid wanted to give United the European Cup in honour of those who had died. Their offer was declined.
Eintracht and fabulous Real Madrid in white.
Madrid went on to dominate Europe for 5 years. They ended in style at Hampden Park, watched by two young men destined to play a major part in United's revival.
I think that created the whole aura about the European Cup. The European Cup was somewhere else, it was in another country, but now it was actually in Britain, being played at Hampden Park. 127,000 people at the game, and they're all at Hampden Park to see that wonderful Real Madrid team. Absolutely magnificent. I mean, because the European Cup, God almighty, it's some trophy if you can win that, but you have to be a hell of a team to win that.
Probably the best game I've ever seen, the Real Madrid-Eintracht game at Hampden Park. And I thought, that is not the same game that we played 2 weeks ago, because the England versus Scotland game, that was awful. And this was just absolute magic. To watch the great Real Madrid playing the way that they played, you went on the pitch the following day or whatever, and we all became Di Stefanos, we all became Puscases, you know, we tried to do something. It was different.
Busby needed men to compete with the best in Europe. He found them in Law and Crerand, but at a price. United had to break the transfer record to get them. And that wasn't the idea. It wasn't the family way.
It was a lot of money for Matt, but he couldn't wait for the youngsters to come through at that particular time because they were all too young. You know, they were in their 16s and maybe 17s. They weren't particularly ready for it. So he had to go out, and it was unusual for him to do that. But within a very short time, within a year of me being there, of course, another 17-year-old came through, didn't he?
And I'm training in a five-a-side with these kids. And this youngster comes through with the ball. And I'm down on my backside. I thought, here. Within a few minutes, the same thing happens. And here's this kid doing to me what I did to other people. He's thrown me a dummy. And the third time he did it, I said, if you do that again, I'll break your bloody neck. It's as easy as that. That was the great George Best.
I can't compare George to anybody else, and I've seen George do things with a footballer I've never seen anybody else do.
This is Best. Wriggling out space. What a fine save! What a fine shot, Georgie Best!
One thing George used to do, he used to purposely play a ball against a defender's legs, knowing that he'd get the rebound, and knowing that his reflexes were so quick that once he got that rebound, he'd be round the player. And people used to say to me, he was lucky there, but he wasn't. He intended to do that.
George Best making space for his cross, and Best! And Law! There it is, 5 minutes more! Straight into the path of Charlton! That's the equaliser from Bobby Charlton!
Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton, George Best, they gave it all the star status and all that. But Crerand, his passing was absolutely phenomenal. He was brilliant.
To Best. Look at this with a little bit of acceleration. Oh, what a beautiful little chance to go! Off Law!
He'd find Law in different positions, and Law would be lurking about, and all of a sudden, boom, he's gone. He's like a lightning, you know, strike a lightning, he's gone, and scoring goals and what have you.
In 1958, there was no future. Now, just 7 years after the crash, Busby had rebuilt a side good enough to win the league and a place in Europe. The holy trinity of Best, Law and Charlton revived memories of David Pegg, Duncan Edwards and all the babes. They gave hope to supporters and players who had thought their dream was over.
And then it all started. And that team that he had was a great team. I mean, they played some fantastic football. It was a ready team, ready-made team. And they played some fantastic football. And we had three of the European Players of the Year in the team, you know. How many teams have got that, ever?
There was always that unspoken feeling that the club had to win the European Cup. It wasn't talked about it. The survivors who were lucky enough to play after it, not because of Munich, but because Matt Busby felt that was good, not just for Manchester United, but good for football.
It was always on your mind that the players who had survived the crash, I mean, you know, to have been involved in a crash and survived it as well, and yet still go on to play at the highest level. No, it was never out of your mind. No, it was always, and of course they didn't talk about it, and we didn't talk about it. We didn't want to hear. And of course when we went flying, you know, into Europe, I mean the plane was always very quiet.
And the thought goes back to the history of the European Cup for Man United, and the great tragedy that happened on the way. And I think the players didn't just play for themselves, the players were playing for the history. They were playing for the history of the club, really, and for the place in the annals of football history forever.